in basic training, we all took aptitude tests. Apparently, I got flagged pretty early based on the aptitude test and the fact that I had 2.5 years of college. And they wanted me to go to OCS.
Oh.
They wanted me to go to engineer OCS. So I thought about that a lot. And then I said, okay, I'll be an officer. So I got immediately sidetracked, went through basic, went through AIT, went to engineer OCS at Fort Belvoir.
So you'd been in college for a couple years. Suppose, near the end of your time in college, you're talking to a fellow student, and a fellow student just brings up the situation in Vietnam, and the student asks you, what do you think this is all about? What is this thing in Vietnam all about? What do you suppose you would have said at the time?
If I was still a student,
Yeah.
well, I was generally opposed to the war. I wasn't virulently opposed, but I thought it was a mistake. I had neither the means or the inclination to dodge the draft or to run off to Canada or to. I actually had a guy that I was good friends with in OCS who had gone to Denmark to avoid the draft, and then he got guilty and came back and enlisted and went to OCS with me.
Wow.
But I did not have the inclination to do that. So certainly the people around me generally were against the war. My fellow students, just about everybody I knew, I think.
Well, was your opposition to the war, was it, rooted in pacifism, or was it rooted in, that I'm not opposed to war as a thing. There's something about this war that I'm opposed to.
Well, yeah, it was this particular combat. Like many kids my age, I mean, I grew up World War II. John Wayne, Audie Murphy. That's what we did in the back lots. We had helmet liners. We had the M1 replicas, the things we actually carve out of wood and stuff. I mean, we just played war all the time. That's what we did. So I was, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but I was certainly not against war in general. But World War II was a whole different animal from Vietnam, and of course there was you have to admit it, there was the personal who wants to get drafted and go get blown away in a war that you don't think is really worth it.
So let's pose the same question, though. Now you're on the plane leaving Vietnam, and the soldier next to you asks you, after your tour in Vietnam is done and you're heading back to the world, the soldier says, what was that all about? Why were we there? What's the point of this conflict in Vietnam? What do you suppose you would have said after having been there?
I would have said it was a misguided effort based on just ideological anti-communism that just wasn't rational, wasn't thinking. They were just determined to somehow protect the world from communism, and it just wasn't worth doing it there. It just was not. Now, fighting the Soviet Union in Europe, yes, if it came to that, but that particular conflict wasn't doing us any good, and it was just a waste of men and people.
When you arrive in Vietnam, what is your understanding of what your job is going to be?
Well, when I got out of OCS and expected to be an engineer platoon leader, I was immediately assigned to the Special Warfare School at Fort Bragg, to go and become a psychological operations officer. So I had expected to come to go to Vietnam and be an S5. That's again, battalion level staff officer who's runs the psychological operations, civic actions for a battalion. Well, at Long Binh, I got orders plastered up on the wall. It said 25th Infantry Division, Cu Chi, platoon leader, engineer company. So I said, well, that's a waste of a year. It was a very specialized, very expensive training regimen. They expected a lot of, the hearts and minds. I mean, we were the Psyops people were the hearts and minds,
Right.
Facilitators in the field. I got into the engineer company in a driving rain and spent about 2 days there waiting for the platoon to come back into base camp. They're out doing mine sweeping, and said, I'm not even sure if I know what a mine looks like anymore. I spent a year in special warfare school, and I haven't done any engineering whatsoever. But the guy who I was in special warfare school with at Bragg, who was in the same class as me, became the G5 for division. And he heard that I was floundering around in this engineer company, and he went to division command and said, you got an S5 here that's ready to go. He needs a unit. And they gave me a 3/4 cav. So I immediately ended up over there as their S5. Civic action and psychological operations was not their cup of tea necessarily. It was getting out and kicking ass, to be honest. So,
Well, let me ask you about that. Because I hear veterans on both sides. I've heard vets who say, look, we should have devoted a lot more time and attention to civic action. We should have devoted a lot more time to hearts and minds. Others say we should not have invested very much time into hearts and minds. We should have just devoted whatever energy was going into that. We should have put it all into just wiping out the NVA and what was left of the VC after TET. Where do you fall on that question?
well, as much as I had philosophical problems with the war, one of the reasons I was happy to be in Psyops and civic action is because I realized that the only way you were going to get any positive outcome in that country was to get the VC first, the South Vietnamese, on board with their government, and to get them to push the NVA back north. And so it was obvious to me that not so much psychological operations, but the civic action aspects of it, winning over I keep saying hearts and minds, but winning over the population to a democratic government in South Vietnam was really the only way that there was going to be any measure of success. With the 3/4 cav, I think they came around to. I mean, they had been doing medcaps and dencaps. They had an E6 sergeant who had been acting as an S5 de facto, who was an interesting character in his own right. He had been living in country for 3 or 4 tours, had a family in the village.
Wow.
And so he did a lot of that, what I call the positive side of it. And when I came in, I continued that, but I also was starting to do more of the Psyop stuff, the leaflets, the loudspeaker things, taking intelligence and trying to target known units in the area and even individuals.
Right. So I want to ask about the civic action programs, the Hearts and Minds programs, and then the Psyops program. And you talk about the med caps and the dent caps. So just describe, you can play the tape in your mind. So here you go into a village. and you're going to, put these programs into effect. Just describe what you can see as you remember this. I mean, what's going on in the village as you're part of this project?
Well, I'll start with my first contact with it, and this gets back to again, that I have that sergeant's name in the back of my mind. But the first thing that he showed me when I took over that office was what he would do daily. And he said, let's get in a deuce and a half, let's go drive around. We went around all the mess halls on Kuchi base camp and collected all of their surplus canned food, anything that they had that was non-perishable. And we loaded it up. And this was my first time going outside the wire, so I was nervous as hell. And I didn't realize we were going to a friendly village and a very friendly environment, but I was still antsy. But we drove down to the Ville near Kuchi, not downtown. And there was an orphanage there. And we unloaded that truck and brought all that food into that orphanage. And it was I believe it was a Catholic Vietnamese individual who ran the orphanage, and he was very pleasant. I had very, very positive experience there. So that was my first contact with that sort of thing. But the classic medcap, dent cap could be a little more challenging. I had bunked with a battalion surgeon. He wasn't real happy about going on med caps. So I had to persuade him, say, okay, we're going to do some real good security here. We'll come in. That's what we would do. We would come in with the platoon. We would, if we thought that there was any reason to be concerned about enemy activity or BC in the area, we would literally encircle the village and come in. Of course, there was nothing there but children and women. There were no young men there, and we all know why that was the case. But we would come in, and they really enjoyed the medical care and the dental care when we were able to do that. And that scenario was repeated fairly common. Once a month or so we would do that. I remember going up to Trang Bang to do one, and Doc was with me, and he was seeing somebody, and he was just kind of in tears, and there was this old 80s something lady who he said had terminal cancer, just nothing he could do. He was really upset about that. But again, it was mostly what you saw was old men and women and children. So and I really do believe that if we could have done more of that, that there may have, well, I don't know if there had been another outcome or not, but maybe.
Did you feel, you mentioned there are no young men in the villages. Did you feel that these villagers that you did come into contact with, that they were kind of stuck between two fires, the VC on the one side and U.S. Arvin forces on the other side?
Well, certainly around where we were, which of course we learned later was Cu Chi was built on top of Ho Chi Minh's tunnel base camp.
Right.
So there were hot villages all around Cu Chi, Boloi Woods, Hobo Woods. I mean, just everywhere you went, there's a really pronounced VC presence, and which I didn't. What I knew, but again, I didn't realize that we were sitting on top of Ho Chi Minh's
Right.
tunnel
Right.
city.
That whole complex. Yeah. But, I mean, so does that mean that you did then have a sense at the time? I mean, did it feel, given the situation, we often hear after the Tet Offensive, the VC are, effectively wiped out. But that's not the impression that I'm getting when I talk to vets in 3 Corps or in the Cu Chi area. It seems to me the VC are still a pretty significant force around there.
Oh yeah, yeah. absolutely. I mean, again, I wasn't in day-to-day combat operations, but when the Cav went out on sweeps and reconnaissance and in force and stuff, there was contact always. I mean, just daily.
And so you're aware of that. At the same time, you're part of these medical projects and dental projects in the villages. Did it feel, I don't want to sound too pessimistic and, I'm not assuming this, but did it feel kind of hopeless that, um, no matter, we can come into this village and do this stuff, but as soon as we roll out this evening, the VC are going to roll in. And, did it feel like it was a winnable situation at the time?
Well, no, I never really thought about winning. Uh, I think I mentioned that because I wasn't sure what exactly that meant, and I was, pessimistic about the effort. But just doing the humanitarian thing of going in and treating people and getting food to them was, I thought, the right thing to do. And I didn't think it was going to necessarily change the war one way or the other.
Well, let's switch to the psyops. And the first question I have related to that is, I've talked to guys who are down in the Delta on the boats, and I hear stories. One of my favorite stories is these guys are supposed to be playing tapes where, in Vietnamese, the recordings are saying, something about evil spirits and all this, but they got tired of listening to that, so they put on Led Zeppelin instead. And so they're cranking Led Zeppelin to these villages, which I just thought must have been wild for these folks in the Mekong to hear Zeppelin cranking up as this boat's going down the river. But was that one of the things you did in psyops? Kind of play these recordings of about the spirits of evil spirits and things like that, or what
Well,
kinds of things did you do as far as recordings go?
yeah, it didn't do a lot of the audio, but we did do some and uh, used two vehicles or two air vehicles
Mm.
essentially to try to message. And again, sometimes it was messaging based on some intelligence I would get from our S2 or from Division G2 about a unit in the area, and and I had to use division resources to make up the tape. Sometimes I didn't know what was being said. I just knew I was going to fly that mission, and so we had two types of aircraft. One picture I sent you a picture of, that's the O1 Bird Dog that was specifically designed for PSYOP operations. It has a chute for dropping leaflets that will disperse them pretty nicely, and it had a huge speaker in the fuselage behind the passenger seat. And then we used the Loach light observation helicopter, also equipped with a giant speaker. And I actually used that more for direct support of say a troop that's out in the field, and we knew that where I got the intel that if a particular VC unit was operating in that area, and I would take that loach up with the 18-year-old warrant officer pilot.
Wow.
And we would fly around and play that, usually something along the lines of, yeah, we know you're here for NBA. Wouldn't you rather be, at home, or rather than down here fighting outside of your neighborhood, and yada yada.
Mm.
And then the screechy stuff. We did some of that, and that was a little less preferable because that was usually at night, and flying O1 Bird Dogs at night in an area where they're shooting at you pretty regular, and they can obviously hear where you are. So, and yeah, they did. They they were horrendous sounds that those tapes made. They were made up for me. I didn't do anything myself production wise.
And so it sounds like the first kind of recording was about persuasion, and the second recording was about, you know, what, terrifying these folks.
Yeah, just disrupting their.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, O1 Bird Dog, did you go out with a gunship as defense? I mean, it seems like that would be a fairly easy target.
It is. No, they were solo missions, mostly daytime, but the night ones that I did maybe two night. And I remember one of those night missions we were flying, and there was a DC-3s, the gunships that had miniguns on them, and they would fly around in support of troops, and these miniguns would fire all tracers, and it was like a sea of lava coming out of the side of the plane. Anyway, we were flying around and did that one night mission that way. But and during the day, no, it was what would happen is that I would put a mission in. I'd go over to we had attached to 3/4 cab was a helicopter LRP light infantry outfit, and they had their own airfield. And I would go over there and put in a mission, say, okay, what I want to do is drop these leaflets out here over such and such village. And they would call up the Air Force. They would come up and we would go out and fly a mission without any support. Nothing really bad happened. One time, this was a full bird colonel, forgot to be on the local command net. He was only on the Air Force net, and he wasn't on the right one of those. So we were flying along, happily broadcasting above one of the 3/4 cab troops, and two F-4 Phantoms, one on either side of the plane, just dove straight down, dropped napalm, and the plane went like that. And he freaked out, obviously. And it turned out that they had that my commander, Colonel McGowan, and the Air Force had been trying to contact this pilot to tell him to get the hell out of the way. They were trying to fly air support, to the ground troops.
Wow.
So I got an earful from Colonel McGowan when we got back on the ground. He said, I said, well, sir, first of all, that's full bird colonel, and he's a pilot. And Colonel chewed me out and said, no, when you order that, you are the aircraft commander. I said, a first lieutenant was going to tell a full bird colonel what to do.
Almost all of these psychological operations in these loaches and Owen bird dogs, you don't have a gunship with you for defense.
No.
And often you did come under small arms fire?
Well, you'd hear it, but usually you're up 2,000-3,000 feet.
Okay.
And small arms fire wasn't going to get you. The Chi-Com 50 would. I saw once, but I also heard from my sergeant who had been flying it. He no longer flew because he'd been getting a lot of Chi-Com 50 fire.
So you had these recordings, and then you also dropped the leaflets?
Yes.
And do you have any idea, what were the messages on the leaflets that you dropped?
Yeah, well, that was a little more hands-on, and we would get the information from our S1, the squadron intelligence guy. I would have them printed up, and I had a local printing shop, and I vaguely recall we used to go down to Saigon a lot to buy medcap supplies, toothbrushes, toothpaste, Vietnamese government flags, all kinds of stuff to pass out during the medcap medcap. But I would get those leaflets printed up for a local situation and get them printed, and we would get like 2 or 3 boxes about that size, just enough to fit on the bird dog. And then we would fly the mission, and I would turn around and open the box and drop them down the chute over top of the bill.
Now, your role was not a combat role, but my impression is though that you were there for some significant fights, and you've mentioned a significant battle with the NVA. What was that?
Well, that was at the what was starting to happen when the dry season really kicked in January, February, and the Cav was out in the field all the time. And I was starting to get some strange missions. I did a liaison mission with special forces to the Korean White Horse Battalion during an operation. I would get called in to meet with a congressional or journalist delegation and escort them into a village. In one case, I flew with them out to a troop, which was bivouacked and had a human wave attack. That's what I'm calling it. The night before, and I took this. There were 2 or 3 journalists and some other dignitaries. So I'm calling them maybe congressional delegation. I don't recall now. I took them along with a patrol outside the wire through a field of bodies. I mean, dozens and dozens of dead VC or NVA and distended stomachs from the heat. I mean, it just only takes a few hours, and it was a pretty gruesome sight. And I didn't think it was exactly secure, so I was a little nervous. I took them down into the village, and there were dead water buffaloes that were again swollen up, and a few shell-shocked looking villagers. Apparently, they had set up 105 howitzers right on the perimeter and were shooting point blank at these attacking the I think NVA. So that was that kind of mission, and then there was the spending, I think, about 2 weeks with the special forces in a place called Perry Tomqui, which you couldn't find on a map if you tried. No idea where it was. I don't even know how I got there. I think I drove my Jeep out there. I was doing that a lot, at least strange little side missions. And I stayed with them. And the main reason I was there was because my Jeep, being squadron level or battalion level, had both division and battalion radios. So I could use those radios so that the cab or division could communicate directly with the Korean units that were operating out in this AO. And I stayed with these Special Forces A team. That was an interesting thing.
The Koreans and the special forces were operating together?
I don't think so. I think it was a fairly large operation, division level operation, that the Koreans were supporting. And I don't have a lot of tactical information on what was going on. I was just passing messages back and forth with the radio. But the Special Forces guys had been staying there for some time. They had this giant sandbag igloo that they lived in. It was like crawling into a beaver's home or something down into it. It's a crazy place.
And your primary job there was communication?
Yeah.
What was your impression of the South Korean soldiers?
Well, I heard they were pretty brutal. I did not see them.
Okay.
They were a ways away. But I heard that they really swept through any place they went and were just kill everybody, basically. They were,
Yeah, that's the reputation for sure. How about these special forces guys? You know, you're doing a lot of work with um, soldiers, regular soldiers, and then you spend some time among these special forces guys. What was the difference in how they operated, how they carried themselves?
oh, they were very laid back. Was really always puzzled about what the hell they were doing there, because it was a isolated village. They said they'd had again another major attack by either NVA or VC a couple of weeks before I got there. But there was this quixotic village chief who had a kind of an old French uh, mansion or manor that was inside the wire. And it was, I guess it was the old part of a rubber plantation, probably. But there was every night there was something going on up at his place, music and this weird stuff going on there. It was just kind of odd situation, something out of Apocalypse Now or something. There's odd stuff going on. But I didn't really interact with them a lot other than to just shoot the shit and have a bimley by at night or something. But basically, I was just sitting out there and listening to the radio for 2 weeks. It was a well, just that was just illustrated some of these strange little jobs that I got.
Sort of these special forces men of mystery kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. But it was one of those types of strange jobs that got me into this major firefight. Actually, it's more than a firefight. It was a full blown battle. Actually, it was, I mean, again, three armored cav troops against what was either an NVA heavy weapons company or battalion, depending on who you believed. And the reason I was there was these three French reporters that needed to be, I was told, needed to be escorted. I mean, they were already escorted. They were on a track. That's how this started. Very strange. Don't recall what I was doing or where I was, but for some reason I was dropped off at an intersection of two dry dirt roads. Again, I said it was the dry season. It was just hot, like a desert dry, and just dust this thick. That's from the tank treads going by.
Hmm.
And there I was standing at this intersection, the M16 on, and just a light pack canteen. And I was the only person there. There was nothing there, and I'm waiting for this armored convoy or column to pick me up. And I had no idea how I got there. I must have been out doing something, and somebody dropped me off. But it was so I hooked up with the troop. These three reporters were only on one of the commo APCs, and we just took off. And I asked, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, we're maneuvering in support of B troop or A troop. I don't recall the units designations, but I talked to the reporters. They were sitting in the back of the APC, and they were pretty anxious. I think they'd gotten into a little bit more than they had anticipated, and it got a lot more than they was going to be interested in seeing. But we took off and moved into well, we're still in a column, but we finally got turned off the road, and we were in a column for a while, and then it was the typical armored column across country. You bust through a hedgerow, and you look up and make sure there's no snakes falling out on the track.
Hmm.
And now that didn't happen during that, but I was apprised by the guys on the track to watch for snakes, falling down there, bamboo vipers. And we busted through a couple of hedgerows, and we got to, and this is late morning now, and the field opened up. There were dry rice paddies, as far as you could see, and 300-400 yards out in front of us is a hedgerow and just a patch of jungle. Again, I think this is a partly old rubber plantation, partly rice paddy type thing, the typical topography for around Coochie. And I told the 3 reporters once I got word from the tank commander or the PC commander that we're going to start moving into what we thought was going to be a firefight. And I told them to get down below, and they're more than happy to do that. And that's when all hell broke loose. So it turned out again that there was a well-entrenched NVA heavy weapons company, whatever. And they started after us with small arms fire, RPG, a lot. And we had, essentially what had happened was we had 1 troop that I think I was in this way, and then 2 troops coming in from let's say we were going north. Again, I don't know where I was or what the direction exactly were, but if we were on line coming north, there were 2 troops coming in from the right. So there were 3 troops, or the same as 3 companies, and these involve numerous APCs, tanks, and we also had which came up behind us, a column of what I think were regular South Vietnamese. They weren't rough puffs. They weren't the militia that you would see in more traditional garb. They were wearing regular army fatigues and stuff. So I assume that they were South Vietnamese regulars. But we started taking fire, and I turned into an infantryman.
Mm.
I just, I was not doing anything with the 3 reporters anymore. They were hiding, and I was fighting. So from about 11 to almost dusk,
Wow,
I was hanging off the left side of the track, probably fired thousands of rounds, M16. What I was shooting at was either tracers. I'd see a red tracer, or I would see a flash in the hedgerow, and I would shoot at that until it stopped. And they were about 100 yards out, and there were explosions all around. There were a fair amount of APCs that were hit by RPGs. And then when it got dark and the sun was setting, most extraordinary thing happened. Apparently, the NVA had booby trapped a daisy chain bomb that was a dud, where it had fallen. Daisy chain bombs are like the huge bombs dropped by the Air Force, B-52s. And off to our right, on one of either the far right of the column or the other troop that was off to our right flank, a tank exploded. And it's the most surreal thing I've ever seen. I looked up, and the turret from the tank sailed over top of my head a couple 100 feet or so, and landed off to the left. Wow. It's the damnedest thing I've still ever seen in my life. Unbelievable. So we kept fighting. Well, I just kept shooting, I'll say. Off to the left, the platoon leader over there, who was my hoochmate back in another one of my hoochmates back in the camp, said that he got into a Chi-Com Tater Masher grenade tossing contest with, as you said, a goop that popped up out of a hole. Threw the grenade up on the track, and he grabbed it, threw it back down, and went off. And he said that you didn't see them around your track; they were coming up out of the holes. No, you sure? I did not. Just not. I was focused forward.
Wow.
So that fight went on until we got dark, and or not quite dark, but until it got dark enough, and the track commander looked around. Again, I believe it's just sergeant. I wasn't on the 2 liters track. The combo track was driven by a sergeant, I'm pretty sure, commanded by a sergeant. And he looked around, and we were the only one out. We were just out in front of everybody. There was no other support anywhere around us. None of the South Vietnamese, none of the other APCs. So he put it in reverse and just hauled it back, away from and the NVA had kind of stopped shooting at that point, but still. So we would haul balls back to where we set up a circular perimeter for the night. We were told to expect an attack.
Wow.
And the 3 reporters skedaddled. There was a helicopter landing zone that was set up just inside the wire. And they went over there and were able to get off on the Chinook that was coming in with resupplies and picking up wounded, which there were quite a few. But again, I was just an infantryman at that point. And so I asked the track commander, said, what's getting ready to happen, do you think? And he said, well, we're going to get set up for a potential attack here. Said, what should I do? I'm just the S5. And he said, go out to the side of the track. There's a piece of PSP, raise it up. There's 2 stakes with it, metal mesh. Hook it up, dig a thing, and dig a foxhole. I just dug a little quick trench, fastest I've ever dug in my life, and fixed bayonet and put a couple of grenades. I always carried grenades in my flak jacket. Put a couple out and sat there for about half an hour. And it was the loneliest moment I think I've ever had, because I was really expecting to be seeing these guys coming out of the dark. That never happened. Colonel McGowan showed up in the morning. He flew in on the Loach, and he said, what are you doing here? And I said, sir, I had no idea. He said, come over here and stand a minute. And it was sun was starting to come up, and it was just this fog. It was a fog of gunpowder and just basic, humidity fog. And it was a surreal place. And there were a lot of old rubber trees and dead. And he sat down and said, yeah, he was troubled, I think, by what had just happened. And I sensed, and I think it's something he told me, though I don't remember exactly, that he was just not so sure that this was what we should be doing. And I think he just, something like he asked me, he said, what do you think of all this? Something like that. What's it all about? I said, sir, I don't know. It was a hell, was what I told him, I think.
It sounds like this fight went on for what, 6 or 7 hours?
From late morning until dark. Yeah.
So this might seem like a stupid question, but does the adrenaline keep pumping for that long?
To me, I think it felt like it went on for about 45 minutes.
The fight.
Yeah, yeah, it just time just didn't mean what normally means. It was just shoot, reach down in the wooden ammo box, get another mag out, shoot, look around, shoot. That's all I did for hours. Again, I was just being an infantryman. I wasn't, if I'd have been I mean, I had some experience helping platoons or troops and platoons within troop moving around and getting them bivouacked and that sort of thing. But I wasn't in a command position. I wasn't an officer at that point. I was just a fifth wheel infantryman.
Mm. So, trying to think of how to formulate this next question, but I guess the simple way I can put the question is, um, when you look back on all of this, you do the psychological operations, the leaflets from the planes, the recordings from the planes, the civic action programs, the medical programs, dental programs. You're part of this long firefight that goes on. Um, Looking back on all of this, what's the main thing that you learned from your experience in Vietnam? And I guess by that I mean, what did you take from that experience that has kind of informed your life ever since?
Let's see. Big question, isn't it? I think there's a kind of a centeredness that I got out of it. Um, Hard to describe. I think that I walked away with a little stronger than when I walked in. When things get tough, I seem to get tough with them. Just centeredness. I don't know how to describe it. When it gets tough, I can just take that experience and use it to do what I have to do.